if you're a parent, a grandparent, a child, anybody connected with anyone who's at school or university these days, you're almost certainly worried about where we're heading. Somebody who's devoted his whole life to being in that education space is sitting beside me, as you can see, Prof. Jonathan Jansen. JJ, welcome back. Your column in the Times was such a good warning and wake-up call, but I wonder, what are we going to do? Where are we heading? Who's going to start paying attention? How do we make the changes? So I suspect that so much of racism in schools and universities has been going on for so long, but now at last people are feeling strong enough, empowered enough by other social incidents in our lives that they're now saying, not good. Please pick up for me and tell me, how do we get to this terrible place? And then let's just work through what we can actually do, because it strikes me that there's so much going on as a defense mechanism from those who are being criticized.
Yeah, so, I study human behavior and I study institutions. And when you do those things, when you're occupied with thinking about the country, you're not surprised when bad things happen. In other words, the incredible accounts of racism in schools, and especially in our elite schools, from Durban to Pretoria to Cape Town and so on, doesn't surprise me at all, because they happen in the context of institutions that themselves struggle, with the past, struggle in the present, and have a fairly dim view of the future. And so the fact is that we haven't really dealt with racism in our schools, in our universities, in a way that deals with what people increasingly call the systemic nature of the problem. What does that mean? It means that when there's a nasty incident, in a school, it's a really bad analysis to suggest these are 3 or 4 bad apples as students, or this is a teacher who just happens to be, incompetent and so on. That kind of analysis leads you nowhere. In fact, it guarantees a repeat of a nasty incident. What systemic, when people talk about systemic racism, what they mean is, let's go to the root of the problem. Let's look at what it is about the institutions themselves, like the school or the university or the home or the church, that enables this kind of behavior to happen in the first place. And so I wrote very much with that in mind. How do you deal with the systemic nature of this problem, rather than the impulse of a school, for example, the one in Milnerton, to send a teacher away for sensitivity training. I mean, it's probably the least, well, let's just be honest, it's the dumbest thing you could do, because it doesn't even begin to address why that a teacher would tell students to enjoy or to submit a fun activity, which is, and drawing up an advertisement for a slave auction. You really, really have to be out to lunch, as they say, if you think that is even remotely educational in a positive sense. But that teacher doesn't surprise me. That teacher is a person of very little interest as an individual, because the question again that you ask in systemic analysis is, what is it about that school that made this teacher believe that this is even okay to begin with?
Surely if the teacher thinks that it's okay, does that not imply that the headmistress, headmaster, whatever they're called these days, has allowed it, or is unaware of it, or is accepting of it?
Well, the interesting thing about systemic racism is that you can't blame any particular individual, and yet you can blame everyone. In other words, if you look at what students have been complaining about in schools, from Bishops to Parklands to Pretoria High School for Girls to Durban Girls College and so on, what are they saying? Because that fascinated me. what are they complaining about? And they would complain about um, hundreds of little, what the literature calls microaggressions that happen every single day in the life of a privileged former white school. Things like using the K word or the N word or the H word in relation to students. Things like a teacher, and I've heard this so often, it's no longer even shocking, I have to say, where a teacher would refer to Muslim kids as Pakistanis or as terrorists. And if you look Indian, you're obviously, a troubled kid, or making fun of the accents of colored, so-called colored students, of asking students or telling women students or women teachers even that your hair is untidy. Now, if you multiply that 100 times in the life of a school, then you begin to get a sense that somewhere in that institution, there hasn't been action taken against, that kind of behavior. And the more it is allowed to become normative, the more it becomes part of the place, the more the students begin to think that this is okay, and the school begins to operate as if that is okay. And so this raises, all kinds of questions. Why now? Why is it that suddenly you've had all of these postings by both alumni from the school, but also students who are currently, for example, the grade 12 class at Bishops? What enables them to come forward at the moment? Because remember, in South African schools, certainly these elite schools, Black students are a small minority within the school. Black teachers are Black African teachers in particular, are almost completely absent, from the staff. So one of the things that is absolutely fascinating is how the killing of George Floyd, the African-American man in America, has sparked a worldwide consciousness, of racism. If you look at Bristol in the United Kingdom and the taking down of a statue that's been there forever, of a slave holder. I've been to Bristol. The first thing critical people will tell you is this was a major slave port, in the days of slavery between Africa and Europe, and so on. So suddenly, this killing of a man with a policeman digging his knee, for almost 9 minutes into his neck, and everybody sees it. He doesn't have a gun, he's not running away, he's not threatening the police, in fact, he's handcuffed, and he gets killed. That has stirred a global consciousness about the everydayness of racism in societies around the world, and in particular countries with histories of slavery like South Africa, like the United States, with histories of apartheid and Jim Crow, as the Americans call it. And all of a sudden, people are reminded in Europe, in Britain, for example, of those daily insults, humiliations that they go through, and that never gets, or seldom gets, brought out into the open. So we should be grateful. It's tough. Trust me, I've been there. It's tough if you're a school leader or a university leader, and these things get brought to your attention. And the key question at the moment is, how are schools going to respond? And the worst thing you can do, as I said, is to treat it as a question of individual pathology. Oh, these bad kids or incompetent teacher. The worst thing that could happen is to sort of say, let's deal with them through disciplinary processes. The worst thing is to shut up or shut down, which is a natural managerial instinct, by the way, as you've seen in some of our schools. Let's shut down the Instagram postings. I understand how a manager is embarrassed and worried about what the parents are going to think of the alumni. That's what you do, but it's a stupid thing to do. What you do is what Radio School just did. And I love this. I don't think I've been there. There's a school in Morningside, Johannesburg, called the Radio. Open up their website. You know what you're going to see? This school abhors racism. Way to go. In other words, make a public statement to the outside but also an institutional statement to the inside that as a school, this kind of behavior is unacceptable. And you open the website and there it jumps out at you. Okay? That is a very positive first step. There are many other steps, but that is a very positive first step into recognizing that we have a problem here with institutional racism, and it's not just a case of bad individuals.
But then in that, we've all been told that when you leave your house, you must put a mask on. Surely there has to be almost a new set of rules which says to every school, I'm sure this exists or it's understood, but it's no longer good enough to assume that people understand. Can you not say that if there is a single racist incident or the suspicion of one, the following has to happen immediately? The teacher is suspended or the child is suspended. There's got to be a set of points, a dummy's guide to when this happens, because if you don't, then it's just another, oh, he was kidding, oh, she didn't mean it. That's not good enough. And also you talk about what happened with George Floyd. It's the extension of the Harvey Weinstein or the Bill Cosby Me Too movement. Suddenly everybody says, now it's out in the open. Now I'm actually going to report that I was raped, and I don't care who gets hurt along the way. You've just got Jeffrey Epstein. You've got to be able to say, no, not one, zero tolerance. Bring that child, bring those parents, bring the teacher, bring someone from the outside who now sits and judges on this, like you did back at Free State University with your kids. What do we do to just say, right, from tomorrow, this is what must apply?
Yeah, so I think that needs to happen, but let me just give a caution here that's really important. You can't really regulate racism out of existence. Those regulations are important. Those consequences matter. And so for sure, the moment a teacher uses a racial nickname on a kid, that must be called out and dealt with immediately. That I agree with. But how do you, in addition to simply applying the law, so to speak, develop a culture that makes the behavior intolerant and intolerable in the first place? And this is where a number of things need to happen at a systemic level. For example, we have very good evidence, and this is in a book that we're about to bring out, that what these elite schools do is to create little islands of privilege in which, for example, you can literally have a school with one black teacher and she teaches isiZulu or another African language. In what world is that acceptable? In what world is that, how do you get a school right here in the southern suburbs of Cape Town, okay, where 82% and in another school, 93% of the kids are white? Hello, did I miss something here from 1994? It's what we've allowed to become normative, to become, and so the kid, think of a white kid. And by the way, anti-racism is not just, in fact, it's not even the issue about black people. Anti-racism is protecting our white youth from growing up with a really stunted idea about what competence means. For example, if your child goes through, a young white kid goes from reception year all the way through to grade 12, never having been taught by a black teacher, I can tell you this, I can promise you this, that kid is screwed. In other words, her understanding of competence, her understanding of what is acceptable, her understanding of who teaches and who learns is wrapped up in this very, very dangerous notion of whiteness. A black kid who goes through school, and I've heard at some universities, students will tell you, I went through my entire university career not having been taught by a black professor. Or this one that I just heard in the Eastern Cape when I interviewed someone, is I've gone through my entire university career and not one lecturer has been able to pronounce my African name correctly. You see, those are the kinds of things that reside in the system rather than in individual behavior. And so you have to make sure that your student body is truly diverse. You have to make sure in these elite institutions that the people who teach are truly diverse. You have to make sure that the cultural symbolism of the school is changed. For example, I grew up in a, in a disadvantaged school, so this is not first-hand experience for me. It's mainly through our research that you still find schools in South Africa that have a day in which they remember the war dead, okay? Which I suppose is fine if you want to remember boys who died in the First World War and in the Second World War, and there's a trumpet that gets blown and there's a flag that, you know what? If that's important to white history, that's fine, okay? But I've yet to hear that a school foregrounds in terms of who died in the war, black soldiers in the war, the sinking of the Menzi, the ship. You know, I mean, this is not about replacing somebody's traditions with another. This is about thinking about the traditions in a way that is inclusive, okay? And that recognizes that the order that gave us wars in the First World and Second World, in the First and Second World wars, was at least a white war. It was really a war in Europe. It was really a war that drew people who regarded themselves at the time as Europeans. By the way, that was the label for white people in my day, as Europeans, to go and fight on behalf of the of Queen and country, or king and country, and then you also had some people here who then were championing the Nazis, National Socialism. You know, you think, for example, of the Osama Brandtag, etc. So it's that dishonesty, you know, that is built into the things we celebrate, the things we regard as worth remembering, that adds to these layers of institutional racism that is designed to be exclusive. Now, yes, the dilemma. If you go to these schools that I've been working with now for the past 3 years here in Cape Town, very elite schools, very successful in narrow academic terms, and you raise these issues, you know, they're more surprised than you are, you know, because it's become so much part of the everyday that your consciousness is completely numb to the fact that you are engaged in an injustice that keeps black people, incidentally, in a black majority country, which is even like more bizarre, you know, on the margins of our public and private schools. And that is why, as I said in the Business Day article, if these schools don't deal with these issues soon, it will, that sore will fester, you know, that grievance will become greater. And then they will deal with what James Baldwin so beautifully called the fire next time. And what he meant by that is God used water. It's a very biblical story of using water, Noah, the ark, to destroy the world. But there's the fire next time in biblical language. And I really, really hope that our principals of these former white, and in many ways still very white schools, do the right thing, you know, in dealing with institutional racism in order to avoid the fire next time.
I want to throw something back at you just for the sake of reminding each other. The times that you've spoken at corporate events and the like, where you've said such a big issue is, though, the quality, the underachievement of so many of those teachers. So now to say, yes, there's only, you know, I only had one black teacher throughout my whole school career, or at university there were none. We all are all, I think, very aware of the poor quality of so many of the teachers. And you said it yourself, you know, the Zimbabwe teachers who've ended up in South Africa through necessity or choice, you said, you know, give me one of those anytime. Well, I might be paraphrasing, I probably am. But what do we do? Do we do thorough testing to make sure that all of our kids get the same opportunity for great teaching? Because terrible teaching, lowering of standards, is such a big issue that we're all aware of. What do we do? Because surely, if we don't have a teacher who should be teaching, they shouldn't be teaching. Let them go away and learn and upskill and get better first. Otherwise, we just, once again, it's a sop to the system.
Yeah, so when you're dealing with schools and you want them to transform, for example, in the context of their teachers and their teaching staff, the thing that they will tell you immediately is we can't find good black teachers. They don't always put it as crudely as that, but that's what they say. Now, you know me well enough to know that I very seldom use colorful language, but let me just say this. This is total nonsense, okay? I have, for example, just this morning, I taught a postgraduate class of teachers, new teachers. They will teach in the schools. The kids who failed my class, half of them are white and half of them are black. Competence has got nothing to do with race. It's got everything to do with opportunity. Okay, I've seen dumb white teachers, I've seen dumb black teachers. I've seen very competent white teachers, I've seen super competent black teachers. This is a small number of schools that if they wanted to, okay, they can in fact grab and recruit and nurture the best black teachers you can find in this country. For example, I'm chairman of the Jake Scatterville Fellowship, of the board of the Jake Scatterville Fellowship. Did you know that every year we have, I think at the moment, well over 100 young people who are the smartest, 80%, maybe 90% of them are black, from the 9 provinces. These are the smartest young people I have ever seen. I've gone to some of these schools and said, here's the names of these kids. Recruit them. Get them to do holiday work at your school. You know, put them under the tutorship of a really great life sciences or mathematics or language teacher. You will not get better anywhere in the world, and I can guarantee you that, by the way. You're right? But they won't do that because the issue is not the competence of the teachers. The issue is the fear of the parents, because the parents and, you know, by transmission, the children really don't believe that a black person can teach their kid. The automatic assumption of a racist is that when I see a black person, then I see somebody who's less able or less competent. Let me make this real for you, okay? I seldom talk about this, but it's a really, I think it might hopefully solve the problem for some, okay? As you know, I've had the opportunity to train in the best universities in the world, and I really mean that. I've been privileged in that sense, okay? I've been taught by people that I never dreamed as a kid on the Cape Flats I'd be able to learn how to teach, to learn how to think, to learn how to write, okay? So few people would sort of question me on my, what's his name? But in every university that I've been to in South Africa, University of Pretoria, the University of the Free State, I can give you a book on the assumption when you come in that you're not competent to do the job. I am dead serious, okay? Now, of course, it would belittle what I've done if I gave you a list of things that we've accomplished that nobody else has accomplished, in my view, in the places where I've worked with as Dean at Tukkies or as Vice Chancellor at the Free State. You know, I can give you a long list and say, I can give you my CV and say compared to the next. But you see, this is not about objective reality. This is about an inbuilt racism that associates color with incompetence. And so I don't buy this rubbish from the schools that they cannot find good black teachers or good black principals. I can fill every school in Pretoria and every school in Durban and every school in Cape Town and Port Elizabeth with some of the best principals that you get, but they get turned down at every opportunity because of, unless there's a crisis. So when Rustenburg goes as a crisis, a major crisis for allegedly mistreating their only black African teacher, what did they do? They hired a black, or in this particular case, she would probably regard herself as a colored principal. Okay? She was there all the time. And she's competent and she'll do the job well. Okay? But why must it take a crisis to bring you to this point? You know? And so I get tired. One of my favorite schools in the world is Pretoria Boys. My son went there. He had a really good technical education. Great principal at the time, Paul Schroeder, right? They just hired yet again a white dude to head up the school. And the old principal meets the new principal somewhere on an open road and hands him the school prayer. Me a bloody break. As it not, so what these schools do routinely is to hire and rehire the same kinds of people, which is an insult to Black people, let me just say this, but it is a danger to all people, and in particular, in the case of Pretoria boys, to Black and white boys at an otherwise really excellent school. And so when you ask me where are the Black teachers and where are the principals, they're there. I can in fact bring them to you. But your fear as a head of a school or the head of a governing body is what will our conservative parents with the money say? That's the game that we have to look in the face.
Boy, I wish there was an answer to that, because that, yeah, I think you really have put your finger on it. Getting the parents, they're just thinking about their little Johnny or their little Sipo, and they only want the best for them. And it is the parents that call the shots ultimately. Maybe our teachers, our heads need to just say, tough, that's what we're doing. It's the best thing for all of our kids. This is one of the best teachers you happen to find. Just close your eyes and hear what he or she has to teach. Oh boy, this is an ongoing thing, and there's once again, no magic solution.
Yeah. Yeah, well, the solution is quite easy, in the sense that the government could do in South Africa what the government did in Namibia and just say, you know what, all the schools in Windhoek with white principals, as of Monday morning, they'll have Black principals. I don't think that's good for a country, by the way. I don't think that's good for a democracy. But why must you wait for an embarrassing incident or a governmental regulation to do what is right? Again, I'm not suggesting replace all the white principals back, but make sure there is equal opportunity. Make sure that you are conscious of diversity. Why can't you, for example, in all your schools, if appointing a Black principal is too much for your, white mind, appoint the next 3 deputies as Black women or Black name, and make sure that they also learn how, because these schools are very different, as you know, from the schools where I studied, but give people the same opportunity, give them the same patience, give them the same support that you would give, by the way, a white inductee into a school. I've seen it. I've seen the levels of support that teachers, and then you begin to change the stakes. Now, here's the really good news. I can name, and in fact, I might even name in the article, schools that have done this. Pinehurst North Primary School, or Red School as they call it, is my favorite school. It's in our book. And Principal Ann Morton said, the person who's replacing me when I retire in a few months is going to be a Black principal. And guess what? She's my deputy right now. That's the kind of thinking South Africa needs. It's not that, I love Ann, and I think she's a fantastic principal. But Ann is thinking not only about herself, she's thinking about the future of our children and the future of our country. Sacred Heart in Yeoville, Johannesburg, long before it was the right thing to do, under Brother Neil McGurk, excellent educator, physicist, PhD in nuclear physics. He opened up his school, and he not only had great quality to this day, he also had great teachers and great kids coming in and out of the school. This can be done, okay? But there is too much, as I said, and it's not a word I use easily because it has huge ramifications, but underpinning all of this is the concept of white supremacy, that inherent in me being white is my ability to govern a school, to lead a school, to manage a school, to teach in a school. And I can't tell you how that irritates me, that these principals and governors simply cannot see the truth. But there are good stories about people who do it anyway and run some of our best schools.
When are you going to be ready to take on the education minister role?
No, that's not going to happen. First of all, I'm no longer sure I want to. But in the crisis, if that call came at some level, of course, I'd probably feel compelled to do it. But right now, I'm quite happy in what I do, which is to raise these issues in public forums, to be critical and supportive of government as it deserves it, or when it deserves it, to make sure that we can feed our children during the lockdown, and I've been very excited to be involved in a lot of that, to compose 600 odd stories or, for a book on learning under lockdown from our children, to work with teachers and consult them, because right now teachers are very anxious, particularly in the disadvantaged schools, about the fact that many of them have comorbidities and might get ill and die. To work with our schools, like Urshel, for example, and St. Cyprian's, who called me in and said, we realize there's a problem here. And I work with them. And even though the number of activist teachers and governors are small, there are good people in those schools who understand that the game is up and that we need to open up to all our children. So wherever I get called and wherever I get asked, I really do enjoy, as you know, not just only in schools, but in the corporate sector, where people, for different reasons, struggle with the same issues around the transformation of boards, for example, and of senior managers within companies and all of that. So I quite enjoy that role. I don't think you need to be a minister with Blue Light Brigade to do significant work. But I am delighted to also engage. As you know, I call myself a public nuisance. And the role of a public nuisance is to raise uncomfortable questions when necessary.
Thank you so much. You're certainly one of my favorite nuisances. Professor Jonathan Jansen, thank you for spending time with Famous Faces again, and we'll talk soon.
Good luck.
You too.